Now, an ex-royal staff member has opened up about his time working at Buckingham Palace. Dan Ottaway, who served as a chef, claims that out of all of the royals that he catered for, Prince Andrew was difficult and more demanding than others.
Behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, past the tourists craning their necks for a glimpse of the changing guard, and far removed from the polished lens of official press photography, a very different reality has long simmered. It is a world governed by ancient hierarchies and unwritten codes of silence, a world where the smiling waves from the balcony are merely the final act of a carefully choreographed performance.
Prince Andrew was quite difficult, and he was much more demanding in the words that he used than his relatives. But he had a lot of praise for Princess Kate. She used to bring the children in after a meal to meet all the staff and be very, very grateful.
However, that curtain is beginning to fray. In recent times, the unspoken truce between the House of Windsor and those who serve them has been broken, particularly regarding one member of the family, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. While the public has watched his fall from grace regarding his association with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, a parallel narrative has emerged from the sculleries, pantries, and private corridors of the royal residences.
My dealings with Andrew were very minor and very few, but the odd occasion that I did have dealings with him, he was arrogant, he was rude, he was bumptious, and I don't take that from anybody, and I gave him as good as he tried to give me. I was once told by a colleague, well, speaking to him like that, you'll get fired. I said, no, he won't. He won't tell anybody. And bullies don't tell anybody.
It is a narrative voiced by the people who pressed the uniforms, cooked the meals, and guarded the doors, revealing a pattern of behavior that suggests the rot set in long before the world took notice. One of the most telling accounts comes from Dan Otway, an ex-royal staff member who spent years navigating the high-pressure culinary environment of the palace. His recollections strip away the grandeur of royalty to reveal the stark personality differences that staff had to navigate daily. According to Otway, out of all the royals he catered for, Prince Andrew stood apart, not for his leadership or his charisma, but for the sheer difficulty of his demands.
Actually, Prince Andrew was totally different. He could fly off the handle at the smallest thing. He would be abusive. He would shout, he would swear. So we had a particular issue with Prince Andrew.
So Otway paints a picture of a man who is fundamentally different from his kin, noting that Andrew was sharper, harsher, and far more demanding in his choice of language than any of his relatives. This behavior was thrown into sharp relief by the conduct of others. Otway recalls with fondness how the Princess of Wales, Catherine, would bring her children into the kitchen after a meal to personally thank the staff, offering a warmth and gratitude that made Andrew's abrasive nature feel even colder by comparison. But Otway is merely one voice in a growing chorus. To truly understand the atmosphere that Andrew cultivated, one must revisit the accounts of those who lived in his immediate shadow. These are the stories that were whispered in the staff mess halls and shared over cigarettes in the loading bays. Stories of a prince whose behavior behind closed doors served as a warning sign that went unheeded for decades. As Andrew continues to deny the historic allegations brought against him by Virginia Giuffre, allegations that resulted in a multi-million-pound settlement in 2022, the anecdotes from his former staff suggest that a sense of entitlement and a lack of empathy were defining traits of his character long before his legal troubles began. Consider the testimony regarding a young valet named Paul, whose experience inside Buckingham Palace offers a chilling glimpse into the daily grind of serving the Duke. Paul lived in a small, modest apartment that connected directly to Andrew's private chambers. To the outside world, this proximity might have seemed like a position of immense privilege and trust, a coveted spot at the right hand of royalty. In reality, according to those who knew him, it was a sentence of sleepless servitude. Colleagues have recalled that Paul lived in a constant state of low-level dread, his life dictated by the harsh, buzzing sound of the prince's intercom. This buzzer was not reserved for emergencies or matters of state. It was a tool for enforcing trivial whims at ungodly hours. One particular story from the late 1990s vividly illustrates this dynamic. At the time, Andrew owned a Jack Russell Terrier. Those who worked in the household described a routine that baffled the conscience. If the dog stirred in the middle of the night, the responsibility for its care did not fall to the owner, but to the valet. At 2 or 3 in the morning, the buzzer would scream through the silence of the staff quarters. Paul would be summoned from his sleep to take the dog out into the cold London night, navigating the dark gardens while Andrew remained warm and undisturbed in his bed. This was not merely a job description, it was a dominance display. Paul later described his dealings with the prince as minor but memorable for all the wrong reasons, characterizing Andrew as arrogant, rude, and bumptious. He recalled a specific instance where he decided to push back, giving as good as he got, only to be warned by a terrified colleague that he would be fired. Paul's response was telling. He predicted that Andrew wouldn't fire him because bullies don't tell anybody. He understood, even then, that Andrew's power relied on the silence of his victims. The toll this behavior took on the staff was visible to the security officers who patrolled the grounds on the night shift. Former officers have shared memories of finding the valet in the palace gardens in the dead of night, exhausted, smoking a cigarette, and muttering complaints to the darkness. It was a scene of profound frustration, a man pushed to the brink by the petty tyranny of his employer. Over the years, this frustration hardened into resentment. One former protection officer recalled the valet admitting simply that he couldn't stand the man. Another remembered a dark strain of gallows humor circulating among the staff, with workers joking that they hoped Andrew's upcoming ski holiday might provide a permanent escape for them all. It was a grim coping mechanism for a group of professionals who felt trapped. This entrapment was not accidental, it was systemic. The structure of the royal household is designed to foster loyalty, but it often enforces submission. Staff members were immersed in a rigid hierarchy that dictated every aspect of their existence, from where they slept to what they ate. Dining arrangements were strictly segregated by rank. Junior workers made do with microwaves and kettles, while senior officials were served traditional meals by white-gloved footmen. Even the stairwells were navigated with a quiet understanding of who stood above whom. Most who entered this service stayed for decades, tethered to the institution by the golden handcuffs of pensions, subsidized housing, and a deeply ingrained sense of identity. To speak out was to risk everything: one's home, one's income, and one's reputation. It was a culture where keeping the machine running smoothly was valued above all else, creating a vacuum where abusive behavior could flourish unchecked. In this environment, Prince Andrew was an anomaly. While the system demanded order, he brought chaos. Former staff describe him as having a hair-trigger temper, capable of flying off the handle at the smallest provocation. He was known to be abusive, shouting and swearing at men and women who were trained to remain stoic and invisible. This raises a disturbing question. If this was how he treated the people inside the palace, people whose sole purpose was to serve him, what happened when he stepped outside of that protected bubble? This is where the silence becomes even more deafening. Protection officers, the men charged with his physical safety, operated under a strict mandate. They were bodyguards, not moral arbiters. They did not follow him into private rooms, they did not sit in on meetings, and they did not vet his company. They stood outside the door, metaphorically and literally. Looking back, many admit to noticing irregularities, last-minute trips, strange itineraries, guests who arrived and vanished with haste. But the culture of the palace reinforced the idea that loyalty flowed upward, and accountability rarely flowed downward. Into this rigid, high-stakes world walked a young housemaid named Charlotte, whose later accounts would become some of the most damaging to Andrew's reputation. Her interviews paint a vivid and distressing picture of a man who was impossible to please. She described a working environment where the prince's temper was a constant, unpredictable threat. In one incident that she recounted to the press, she described Andrew shouting at her over a gap in the bedroom curtains, a gap so minuscule she claimed she could barely see it. The triviality of the offense made the severity of the reaction all the more terrifying. She recalled him storming down the hallway, his voice raised in anger, leaving her in tears. This was not the behavior of a demanding perfectionist. It was the behavior of a man who enjoyed the power he held over those who could not fight back. Perhaps the most bizarre and widely discussed example of this need for control involved his collection of stuffed animals. It sounds almost comical, a grown man and his teddy bears, but the reality described by staff strips away the humor. Former Royal Protection Officer Paul Page famously testified in court about the specific, rigid instructions regarding these toys. According to Page, there was a laminated diagram kept in the room that showed exactly where each bear and stuffed toy had to be placed on the bed. If the arrangement deviated even slightly from the diagram, Andrew would reportedly become agitated and abusive.